Welcome to the Conduit Deeper Podcast, a podcast that takes a deep dive into the details that surround our current sermon series, from current events to fascinating finds to conversations that take us deeper into the Word. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to the Deeper Podcast. Mo is somewhere in Wyoming, may or may not be falling off a horse. The hope is that he is, if you've been watching for a while, you remember he had the little incident where his lips swelled up because of an allergic reaction. So we're hoping for none of that this week. Also kind of hoping that it is happening because the photos were amazing. I'm supposed to say this too. If you haven't subscribed, you got to do that now. Because that apparently does help us, Caleb, right? That helps. So if you subscribe, hit the little thingy button to subscribe. But this week, because Mo is out, we've got Dr. Michael Easley with me, who's been a friend for a while, a mentor, and bringing in the heavy hitters because, I mean, we're kind of in the deep end of the pool right now because, so if you don't follow Michael online, in context, on all the social media, his YouTube channel, Ask Dr. E questions, you're missing out. You should do that immediately too. But this is going to be like an hour of Ask Dr. E.
And I can just make up answers, wing it.
Just wing it. It looks like you're about to wing it. Coming in here.
Hey, you asked me some questions, so I try to answer.
Right. Well, that's the whole purpose of our little Deeper podcast is, actually the original purpose was on a Sunday, I'd have all this material that I would just shaving it off.
Cutting room floor.
Yeah. So we'd come back and this is all the stuff that didn't make it, like in a Brazilian steakhouse where they're just shaving off meat. And so that's still kind of it.
But is it really meat?
Some of it's not. It's gristle.
Particle board.
Didn't belong in there to begin with.
Sorry.
But one of the things that you have based your ministry on is don't let the world teach you theology. And the last few months, podcasters have begun teaching us theology.
Interesting.
And it's, we talk about it a lot, like the Christless conservative. You can be a conservative, but you can't, without Christ, it's just another set of rules and regulations. And what's resulting right now is, and I don't know, I'm going to start with this question. So you've been doing this a lot longer than me. Have you ever been in a season where the anti-Israel sentiment has been so in the zeitgeist?
Not in my lifetime. I mean, obviously we go back to World War II.
Yeah.
And when anti-Semitism from a Western notion, but no, I've never seen it.
It's wild. I had lunch with Iftach Gepner yesterday from in Absor, and he was sharing how lonely it feels right now to be a Jew. And
that's so sad.
They said that his exact words were, like, when we travel right now, everybody in Israel kind of knows we don't speak Hebrew when we're in an airport. Any place out of Israel, we don't speak Hebrew because the propaganda that's been coming out has been so deep. And then he said, to us, this feels like what it would have felt like in the 1930s. And that really landed with me. And going back to, podcasters, I mean, one of those stood in Charlie Kirk's memorial and started talking about the Jews, sitting around eating hummus and plotting to kill Jesus. I don't know if you saw that, but that was, he said, for us, for the Jews, that was like, whoa, that's a scary thought in front of hundreds of millions of people.
October 7, and you've been over there, October 7 was perhaps, I've been saying for the last 10 years, Darren, I've used the word evil more than in 45 plus years of being involved in some kind of ministry. I've never seen evil as in our faces as we do now.
Yeah.
And October 7 was a kind of crescendo. And then Charlie Kirk, these things happening. And to me, whether it's anti-Semitism, however we define it, it's evil. I mean, when you see a gaze for Hamas or gaze for Palestine, it's so incongruous that Israel's committing genocide. I mean, was it Saul was the one that said, you go after your opponent by accusing them of what you're currently doing? Was that Alinsky? Who was the one that said that?
I don't know, but that's brilliant.
Yeah. So when they attack you for X, it's what they're already doing.
Yeah.
And it's just an observation, but I think evil is the only way I can...
Yeah, I mean, having been to the Gaza envelope after October 7th happened, I guess I was so naive because it literally didn't occur to me that anybody could look at that and then try to do like an equivocation of, well, if they wouldn't have done this would have never happened to them, like, victim blaming. But what's been really bizarre to me, like I would expect that from like an AOC or an Ilhan Omar, but when it started coming from conservative circles, like I'm really befuddled. And by the way, that's one of the things that they were talking about yesterday at lunch was like how weird the people that they would have never thought.
Well, how can an elected official who's Jewish?
That's a good point.
I mean, it's like incongruous. It's like at least you'd have a little national heritage or lineage that you're proud of. I mean, I'm German, Italian, Irish, and I'm kind of proud of that, right? That's my people. And if you were born in some, maybe it's never a pure line, right? Maybe our parents were English and they married a Jewish person, whatever.
Well, one of the things, actually the main thing that I wanted to spend time talking to you about was I'd actually put a little resource up in our private Facebook group. And it was basically, here's the myths and the lies about Israel and Hamas. And there were some people that are really good people that were kind of pushing back on me. And one of the things I realized was they weren't pushing back on necessarily the contents of the piece, but the credibility of the author.
Okay.
And so I ended up then throwing up some stuff in the Facebook group of, okay, well, here's some credit. If you think this guy's not credible because whatever, here's a couple of PhDs. It was you and Dr. Jeff Myers. And
Myers is great.
Some resources. We're interviewing him next week. Because what I really wanted to get to was there's this, you can't say theology is right or wrong based on someone's response to it necessarily, right? Like people who hold to replacement theology doesn't mean that they're going to become anti-Semitic or whatever. But I do know that I've never met a dispensationalist who was anti-Semitic, but I've definitely met some.
There may be one.
They might be out there. I don't know. It kind of
There's so many iterations.
It ruins their shtick. But that said, I thought, half of our church probably doesn't even know those terminologies. Okay. And
agreed.
So
most churches.
Right. And that, look, that's on, I say, it's on me, but at the same time is believers, how do we approach the word in general? But I guess we start with that. So a lot of the things that you're hearing right now that are coming from people who would hold to to a replacement theology is definitely Israel is not the Israel that we think it is. That you hear a lot of the Revelation 3, the synagogue of Satan.
3:9, yeah.
But I guess we should start with just defining some terms. Like, how would you define replacement theology?
And I'm happy to do that, let me just say, the other thing I think, and you're more dialed into this than me, we're up against a truncation of information through Snapchat and TikTok and these bite-sized pieces of content. People don't read a theology book. Well, folks in your church do. But people don't read theology. They don't think critically. And the other thing, keep in mind, whether you're a covenant theologian or reformed, which is one and the same generally, or dispensational or progressive dispensationalist, think about process theology, systematic theology, biblical theology, reformed theology. There's camps of people that align themselves with this. And years ago, I've taught theology in my own little small groups over the years, but there's this little chart in this book I like, and it's got a-mill, post-mill, historic pre-mill, and dispensational pre-mill. And I put the names at the bottom just to help people understand. So in a-mill, you've got Michael Horton, Mark Dever, Jai Packer was a-mill.
Yeah.
There's a guy that you know better than me, Gary DeMar. He's very much in that camp. Post-millennium, Tim Keller, R.C. Sproul, Hodges, Warfield, etc. Historic pre-mill, you wouldn't know these people. Dispensational pre-mill, John MacArthur, Chuck Swindoll, J. Dwight Pentecost, all the Dallas guys, John Walford. And you got these outliers like John Piper, who Piper's kind of a post-mill, post-trib guy, but sometimes he says things that are like, that sounds like dispensationalism.
Right.
The reason I bring that up is because we are of a time when I'm of Paul, I'm of Cephas, I'm of Apollos when it comes to theology.
That's good language.
So if I'm of Piper or I'm of Grudem or I'm of, whatever, just because they hold it and now it's truncated in a TikTok or some okay, that's what I believe. I have a fun story. One of my kids went off to Word of Life for a year up in Screen Lake, and it's a great immersion year. And she called me all upset and was talking about different theologies. And she goes, "Dad, what are we?"
I don't know what I am. Tell me.
That's that's part of what you're learning is to understand what you believe and why you believe. So,
right. Which, by the way, that's kind of what we're doing with this series, right? Equipped, which is here are the issues. Here's the way we're reading the Bible, and just being equipped for like literally these simple
100%.
Because something I've been saying quite a bit lately is it's a 20-second question, but you're not willing to give it the 20 minutes, even 20 minutes for an answer.
Right.
And
this device has changed the world because now, and not being judgmental, you can also run the world from it. Mm-hmm. I can look here and get something AI in a second. I have not put any sweat equity or mental critical thinking in the process.
Right.
Now, to jump to your bigger point, covenant theology is essentially an amalgamation of Reformed doctrine, and it's really hard. I don't want to be unkind. I have no animus towards my Reformed brothers.
Yeah, there's some really smart people
at all. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like anyway, I won't go there. But replacement theology is essentially that Israel failed, and so the church has replaced Israel. It's also called supersessionism. Yep. And you can go back to Augustine, you can go back to Chrysostom, a lot of church fathers, and their impetus for that really was because of the blood curse, let his blood be upon us and our children, that the Jews, when they were wanting Barabbas released and Christ crucified, that because they rejected Messiah. And so Luther, you take any of the early reformers, understandably, the way they looked at it in their worldview was, well, they crucified him. They killed him. They rejected their Messiah. So then the emotional conclusion would be, God's done with them.
Right.
But as you pointed out a couple weeks ago, an incredible message you gave on the Abrahamic covenant, that what we call unilateral covenants, he didn't make that, in a sense, to Abraham. He made it on Abraham. You will be a blessing. You will. And Abraham's just a unwilling or willing participant in the program. It's going to happen whether he follows through or not. Abraham couldn't break the covenant.
Right.
And as you pointed out, that was to the world.
Which is, and maybe that's where the disconnect becomes, because where I feel like it's gotten really muddy is that somebody like a Tucker Carlson is approaching it from an America first, America only mentality. So he's taking a political framework, and then you've got the and again, no hate on this necessarily, because we have a real population right now that was lied to by our government, during the COVID era. Sure. And so everything becomes a conspiracy. So you've got that sort of leading the way, of which I'm hearing things like the Rothschilds created the modern state of Israel, and again the America First thing, which is not America only, but that seems to be muddying the waters, because I'm hearing people say, well, it's a theological thing, it's a political thing, it's a social thing. But I said it on Sunday, when you don't know what's true, we got to go back to the one thing we know that is true, which is God's word.
Boom. Yep.
And go from there. And tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, but it seems that the main thing that the replacement folks would say is that you have to go to these chapters, Ezekiel, Revelation, and it becomes allegorical as opposed to literal.
So let's talk about a word you use, and maybe folks are familiar with, hermeneutic. Hermeneutic is the way you approach something. So when you do a Bible study, how do you approach the Bible? You're in a Bible study in a home, and they read it and go, what's that mean to you? Well, you've totally jumped the shark. It doesn't matter what it means to you. What does it mean? And so a hermeneutic is, and the way I was trained was a normal, grammatical, literal, contextual, historical understanding. A silly way of saying if the plain sense makes common sense, it's foolish sense to seek another sense. And don't ask me to repeat that because I don't do well with S's.
We'll clip that or something.
Yeah, it's all good. But you have an overworking of the text on the one hand and an underworking on the other. So when I read the Bible, am I reading it through a lens of John Piper or of John MacArthur or whomever my hero is, or am I looking at the plain, grammatical, contextual, common sense, literal? What does it mean? Typically ascribed, and I don't want to be unkind to reformers, covenant theology, they allegorize a lot of things. And they have good responses to this, but you bring up Israel, the nation of Israel, Jewish people, Hebrews, they'll parse those to some degree to fit their agenda that this is an allegory. And I go, no, that's a plain grammatical, contextual, unless you can show otherwise. You will not find covenant theologians teaching Ezekiel, Revelation, beyond the 7 churches. They won't touch most of Daniel. They won't touch prophetic literature. It's hard to explain it. It's allegorical. You can't know it. I have a whole stack of Revelation commentaries. The Reformed guys, it's real short when it gets beyond chapter 7.
Yeah, they've got a lot of energy on chapter 2 and 3, right? The 7 churches.
Yeah, and then it kind of plays out. And the body of Christ is interesting in a lot of ways, but the slogan "Don't let the world teach you theology" was something I said extemporaneously 30 years ago. And I think we are of Apollos, we're of Cephas. Christ has been divided in this. Why don't we trust him at his word? You observed earlier that in other developing countries, they don't parse this stuff this way.
Yeah.
They read it and they accept it. Now, are there allegories? Yes. The eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the world, that he might find those whose hearts are totally yielded to him. There's not a pair of eyeballs going around the earth.
Yeah.
It's an idiom. He's looking,
yeah.
Right? That's the plain sense, the common sense, the literal language, but it's plain sense. So we certainly have metaphor and allegory.
Sure.
But I have a hard time cutting out, as you pointed out, the Abrahamic covenant, the Davidic covenant, the New Covenant. You could arguably put those together. The Noahic covenant. Those were non-negotiable.
Yeah.
These are going to happen.
Yeah, the thing that has been, it just feels so simple, is that there was no if to Abraham, and so he didn't come back and add it, like he didn't amend the contract.
Well, here's a good question for anybody. Where does Hagar come from? She is the collateral when he lies in Egypt. And they send him away with servants and animals. So he picks up this Egyptian maidservant who becomes a nemesis. And then Sarai, in her own human worldview, I can't have a child. I don't trust God. I don't trust God. God talked to you, not me. You sounds like somebody else, doesn't it? Adam and the woman. You didn't come through. God didn't come through for you. So go into me, and I'll have go into Hagar, and she'll have a baby. Who do we get? Ishmael. Oh, that Ishmael might walk before you, Abraham pleads with God. No.
Right.
No. So even in sin and in disbelief in this situation, God's promise was not voided. You're going to have a child eventually on my timetable, not yours or your wife's. And then, of course, the whole story of Ishmael, and we get Islam out of this,
right.
Centuries later. But my point being that you can't abrogate the Abrahamic covenant. You are going to be a blessing. From your seed, the world will be blessed. You go to a land I will show you. He didn't know where he was going. And if you follow Genesis account 12, 15, 17, 19, each time God gives him a little more information on the covenant, when they're together and they've got a split because the land is so big with Lot, what did he tell him on the front end? Leave your people. And Lot's with him, with all these descendants. And it takes the schism to get him stripped out. God's not hard on Abraham. He doesn't punish him.
Right.
Because he made the covenant with himself. That's the only explanation. Because the bilateral nature in Israel, if you do this, I'll bless you. If you don't, I'll bring the curses of Egypt on you. And he did every time. Cycle of Judges. He brings other marauding nations to attack them. So it's from a 30,000 theology standpoint, the unilateral covenants stand out to me like strobe lights.
Yeah.
They're going to happen whether you obey me or not.
Yeah.
So that's where I have a hard time getting around Israel not being in some program just because they rejected the Messiah.
And when you speak of that, you just mentioned that about what you were referring to. I was in Nepal in 2019, and most people don't know. I wouldn't have known that it's as a nation, Nepal is becoming more and more increasingly hostile to Christianity. The one thing that communists, Hindus, and Islam can agree on is they all hate Christians, and they ask us to teach on Revelation for 3 days. I'm like, they're going to get their money's worth out of me. And fortunately, I had actually, weirdly enough, taught on that, because even when I was leading the Bible study before it was a church, I always felt like if I'm answering a bunch of questions nobody's asking, is it a good use of my time? And
we like talking about things we like.
Yeah. And so, and what are they, and even before, TikTok or any of that, there was lots of questions around that, but Revelation and I had learned it, read it, and it just seems so literal. Obviously, a lot of poetic language, prophetic language, but it's just even the timeline, the outline that's in there, those things
pretty strong,
right? Yeah, it's like, and then it just follows it. But when I got there, they read it the same way I read it, right? They were reading it quite literal, and if Jesus, we know he spoke so much about the poor and the powerless. To leave us with a word of God that you had to get a degree to understand, it doesn't feel very much like God. And when I hear I'm with you, a lot of my friends hold to replacement theology views, and not all of them are anti-Israel. So I do want to be clear on that. But they sit around using all these huge words that a few years ago we were trying to figure out if we were going to be in a jet stream as a church. Like a group and non-denominational. So I was dancing with the Acts 29 guys back then, because I'd known Driscoll from my music business days, and I had to pass. And this is a good thing. I had to pass the theology test. It's like 3 guys, 2 of which you
ordination exam.
Yeah, 2 of which you would know. I felt like there's like a shining light in my face. And I passed the test, but I ended with saying, I totally appreciate what you guys are doing here. I get it. But nobody that I know talks like this. Like, I'm going to Haiti next week, and I can describe penal substitutionary atonement in a sentence, but I wouldn't use those words with it. And so you have to, the theology basis is important. Obviously, if you've been around Conduit for any length of time, you know that we view God's word as important. But when you start torturing it to the point where we just have to skip parts because it's simple to me is if Jesus fulfilled 300 and some odd prophecies in the old covenant, then those rest of those are allegorical then, and just the ones that were Jesus were literal. Like, there's some real questions that are unanswered in that camp. And for us, I've made it clear to our church, and we've got cessationists and continuists, and we sitting right next to each other. And I've actually enjoyed that part of our church family. But as a church, as an elder board, we do not subscribe to replacement theology. We do believe that God has a plan for Israel, and we didn't just make it up. Like, we've
right. Again, I think it goes back to the systems and the personalities more than a careful study of the text. And you pointed this out in the message, Romans 11, and this also gets me, Darren. The Reformed guys, we sharpen our knives on Romans.
Right? It's the whole thing.
Yeah, but then we get to this and we have to do some interesting interpretation. I say then, God has not rejected his people, has he? May it never be. And that's his strong mega anointing. No way, may it never be. For I too am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham. Who can make that claim? Of the tribe of Benjamin, God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. That's heavy theology. Or do you not know the scripture that says in the passage about Elijah who pleads with God against Israel, Lord, they have killed your prophets. Think about this. Elijah's commissioned a Jewish prophet, and he's saying this about his own people. They've killed your prophets. They've torn down your altars. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life. What is the divine response? I have kept for myself 7,000 men whom you have not bowed the knee to Baal. and the whole thing is, and he goes on to talk about his gracious choice of the Jews. It wasn't because they earned it or were somehow in this, structure of works salvation. But I just find it striking. I was in a guy named Michael Cromartie, who you might have known.
Don't know
in
him.
D.C. He's with the Lord now. Very reformed dude, friend in D.C. And we were at this event, and there were tables of pastors. I want to say 8 or 10. There were 3 tables. I was the only evangelical, fundamental, Bible-believing dispensationalist. They were all Reformed, Anglican. It was cool. And rather than talk about the latest movie or we've seen or whatever, I had probably just come back from leading a group to Israel, and I tossed out the question, do you guys think Israel plays an important role? It's, doesn't mean it's like a piece of dirt. What do you think? And we went around the table, and all of them basically said it was a piece of dirt. Until Michael, who was sitting right beside me, and he said, well, given your parameters, it's more than a piece of dirt, but not much. Now, nobody asked me my opinion, which was okay, because I tossed the question out.
Yeah.
But I sat back going, this is really interesting and this isn't from a biblical theology. This is accepting a covenant reformed theology that's, even our friend Wayne Grudem, I love dearly. He's not a replacement theology dude. So you've got this interesting tension of, I think it's more in alignment with a personality.
Yeah, that's actually really helpful for me, even framing it that way.
And I'm not mad about it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, guys, don't diss on Israel because you have a pastor or YouTube telling you, Israel doesn't matter anymore. This was the people for whom we received the blessing of the messianic promise in 2 Samuel,
right.
The Davidic covenant. There will always be a Messiah on the throne of David. There will always be a king. In the new covenant, I'll put my spirit in your heart. He'll indwell you. I mean, the fulfillment of those 3 unilateral covenants alone is like, why would I have to find a way to get rid of it? Now, when you go back to Luther and Calvin, and there was a strident anti-Semitism there, and that probably, you asked earlier about
Calvin
where it
too?
Started. Oh, yeah.
I remember, I knew Martin Luther, but I didn't know Calvin.
Luther far more than Calvin. Mm-hmm. And then Calvin is attributed for a lot of things he never said or taught. Calvinism is sort of the catch-all for your defensive Reformation theology.
Right.
I've yet to meet a 5-point Calvinist who really understood the Synod of Dort, where the 5 points came from.
Huh.
Because I always say, I'm a 5-point Calvinist. I go, tell me about the Synod of Dort. Well, if you can't answer that question, don't call yourself a 5-point Calvinist.
You just dropped a point.
Because you don't know why they have these 5 points. And by the way, Calvin's dead long before those 5 points were codified. But be that as it may, we're funny people.
Well, one of the things, going back to the dirt, that you and I have both been to Israel many, many times, and you weigh more than me, and
excuse me,
more of a glutton for punishment than I am.
Excuse me.
But we wouldn't have the Dead Sea Scrolls if it weren't for Israel. One of the I've actually alive long enough to remember that one of the attacks on the credibility of, and by the way, Muslims still attack the credibility of the Bible.
Have to.
Is it accurate?
Too many authors.
Is it accurate? And the Dead Sea Scrolls show up, and now we have one of the strongest apologetic ever for. No, doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but at least we know it's accurate. We can say that, we can check that off the list. We would not have that if it were not for Israel becoming a nation and the story of the miraculous, getting it out of there before they even knew what it was. And
Step back from a geopolitical standpoint for just a second. Why does everybody want that piece of land?
Yeah.
It's the size of Connecticut.
Yeah.
Why do they want it? I mean, here's the Middle East, and here's this little sliver on the Mediterranean Sea, split down by the Jordan River, enemies on 3 sides.
Yes.
Why do they want that sliver?
Yeah, just that alone is,
to me, is theology. It's God's sense of humor. It's like, I'm going to pick a piece of land that you're going to fight over until I return.
Yeah.
And it's this big.
It's tiny and not that great. I mean, where Israel has taken over, again, whether this is, you want to attribute it to prophetic or not, but the fact that they've managed to, they can make clean water from salt
Land
water.
of milk and honey, baby.
It's incredible.
Have you ever been in the spring when the dew comes out heavy and the desert turns green?
Yeah, it's wild.
You can't believe it. It's like something in science fiction. Because I've been to the Judean wilderness so many times, and it's just a desert.
It's a desert.
And then it's got this green hue like moss, like the Shire going, what?
Right. I've only seen that once. We usually go in February, but there's usually like a bloom going on near the Dead Sea during that. It's just visually unbelievable.
Well, and the Israelites, we can talk about the nation, the Jew, the Hebrew, all these type of things, but I think you have to go back to the covenant. He made a promise to Abraham and by the way, that ethnos word we get in the New Testament, in the Great Commission, make disciples of all ethnos. In the Jewish world, the non-Jew is called the goyim. Goy, im ending means plural, those that aren't of Israel. And obviously they're a minority against the goyim, but that's where the Old Testament is trying to separate his people from. You're to be separate from them. Don't marry with them. Don't intermarry with them, because you're my chosen people to be a blessing to these people. And then, of course, it all runs to pot.
Right.
But there was always just one plan A. There was no plan B in the process. Anyway, I digress.
Well, with that in mind, one of the questions that I'm still kind of batting around in this is the eschatology of it. Like, we're talking about the past and the present of Israel. And then there's the future piece of it, which my hope is somehow to cover that in 35 minutes on Sunday. But even that it seems really clear in Scripture that there's a literal king on a literal throne in a literal Israel that is spoken of in the Old and the New Covenant. How do Reformed people deal with that?
Guys like R.C. Sproul are going to go to Matthew and they're going to camp on certain passages. Dispensationalists and traditional Reformed guys will look at the Sermon on the Mount differently. I'm going to go back to systems for the answer, rather than get into some of the technical points. Yeah,
because you and I consider my wife told me once on a Sunday, Darren, just because you think it's fascinating doesn't mean it is.
When I was in seminary and my buddies and I would be up late writing papers, my wife would just shake her head and go, "Nobody cares." Yeah. So it's systemic. Eschatology. Think about this. We have the clearest beginning of the Bible from Adam and Eve and what God intended through the Noahic covenant, through the Abrahamic covenant. Why would not eschatology be as clear? I mean, just from a bookends. I find the bridegroom, that God presents the woman to the man, and the bridegroom in Revelation, the most fitting open and closed bookends there in all history. And Paul talks about this in Ephesians 5 when he talks about the bride of Christ. Why does the bride wear white? Not because she's a virgin, because no spot, no wrinkle, nor any such thing. That's where Paul talks about it in Ephesians 5. That's what Revelation is. Jesus is presenting his bride to himself. The reason the bride wears white in the Western wedding tradition is because she represents the church for which he died, and she's white because her sins have been forgiven, and that's the only way the bridegroom can marry the bride. So from the first man and woman to the final Jesus Christ and his bride, this is the picture. So why would that eschatology be murky or unclear? The timelines we can debate ad nauseum. I go to a plain grammatical, historical, literal, contextual appeal, and I think the 1,000 years is literal. I think the reign is literal. Now, if you want to argue mid-trib, post-trib, God bless you. I'm a pre-mill, pre-trib guy. I'm not going to be mad at somebody who holds a different view. And I have peer... this is another thing, and you're a better exegete of culture than me. Why is it, and this is going to sound really self-aggrandizing, why is it I don't have a beef and get mad at my on-mill Reform guys, but they call me a heretic because I'm a dispensationalist?
Right? Like mock us.
It's fascinating.
There's I won't say names because they're actually some friends of mine too.
But from a cultural standpoint, is that like a coalition? Like you're not one of us, so we have to vilify you? Or is it or you're just stupid and you don't know what we know?
I think it's really interesting. So my theory on it is, because it's sort of twofold. There's the theological porcupines, right, that are just like
mad.
You make a lot of great points, but man, you're really sharp. But there's been another like sort of undertow in the next generation of it, where it's almost like making fun of it, which is, I guess, the same thing. But it's the idea that Jesus is going to return is not like a tinfoil hat thing. Like, he said he was going to return, but it seems like it's become, even that is being like mocked in a, like eschatology is some weird thing that we don't talk about.
There's no rapture. There's no literal reign. He's just going to I was reading, I think it was DeMar's landing page. I wanted to see what his doctrinal statement was. And number one, it was like hardly a page, but the end times thing was just kind of absent. It's like he'll return. Okay.
Yeah, so culturally and theologically, there's a generation that came out of the seeker movement, right, where we didn't really talk about hard things because we didn't want to offend or scare anybody. So they've had literally no teaching at all on it, and because the Book of Revelation, it's a wild book, and I don't know. I was literally watching a video a couple days ago. It was a friend of mine, and it was actually kind of funny. It was tongue in cheek, and I know him well enough to know that he's not making fun of me, but
right.
He's recognizing his audience thinks this is weird, so I'm going to play along. This is kind of weird, but I'm listening to it going, but I don't want to feed into that, because it's not weird that Jesus is going to return. That's something we kind of need to hold on to.
So again, back to ends, because he has a nice little snapshot. There's these categories: second coming, is that real? Resurrection, is that real? Judgments, tribulation, millennium, Israel, and the church. So those are kind of the topics that you're going to look across this eschatological spectrum. Israel and the church, I would hold, they're still in play. The promises to Israel were non-negotiable. I was going to read I did read it earlier. They're not all his people, but not all Israel will be saved.
Right.
So we do differentiate between this land being completely converted, but it's still on God's chessboard, not to be indelicate. And then you have Amil, the church is the new Israel. There's no distinction between Israel and the church. So that'd be the perfect wedding of replacement theology. But then if you look at their millennium, there's no literal millennium. Tribulation is experienced in the present age. We're now in tribulation. I hate to think this is really that hard, right? Anyway, I won't parse it down too far, but the resurrection is such an interesting thing, because you know this as well. You've taught the Easter passages. There were other bodies that were raised from the dead besides Jesus. Mind blown.
Yeah, we just skip right over that like that didn't happen.
Whoa. Exactly. Who are those people, right?
Right.
Why'd they get the early ticket to heaven? Front row. But then you look at, why couldn't there be other resurrections? Why couldn't there be a rapture that makes sense, even though the reformer doesn't want to embrace that? I go back to, in my pea brain, Darren, it's the system. And let me also say this. Good people taught these things.
Yeah.
Luther and Calvin were not perfect. They were great theologians of their time. I mean, Luther, ostensibly, after Augustine, might have been one of the most important, priest turned Protestant. By the way, he never intended to start a Protestant Reformation. He was trying to reform the Catholic Church.
That's an interesting point.
He's a priest. All the reformers were Catholic priests, by the way. This is lost on today's culture. He was trying to reform the church, the indulgences, the problems he saw. He wasn't trying to break away. The word Protestant was a pejorative term. Those protesters, when they wrote the Geneva Bible and they put notes in the bottom, that was called the Protesters' Bible. You had to have notes to defend your position against the Holy Catholic Church. So this arched back Reformation, we're right, everybody else is wrong. No, they were trying to reform what they saw was wrong in the Mark Knowles' book, Take It or Leave It, is the Reformation still ongoing. He's a brilliant historian. I think he kind of landed mushy. But the question is, are we still trying to reform the church? I would say no.
Right.
Are we still trying to reform theology to be correct? Yes.
Right.
That's what you do every Sunday.
Yeah.
You're trying to help people say, this is what God said. He didn't stutter. It's clear. A Nigerian, a Nepalese, people can understand it.
Yeah.
Now, are there layers that are unfathomable? Yes.
Yeah. To me, that's the beauty of the word, right? Is that it's simple enough that a child can understand it, and deep enough that theologians could spend years and years studying it.
You know my line, morning by morning, new verses I read. I never saw that before.
But that is, for those brothers and sisters, like one of the conversations I had with a dear friend who's passed on now, his theology was that we, as Christians, are making the world better.
Dominion theology.
So that Jesus can return to it. And I remember asking him, do you have the internet? Have you seen the world? Like, I've been in the world. And if that is the hope,
we're toast.
We're toast. And, and he had, it was kind of funny. He was kind of rattling off these stats about, fewer people are dying in war, the world. It felt like a very American Western idea.
Bingo.
That the world is getting better. And I've seen too much of it to know that if that's your hope, you're waiting for the world to get better, and you're in Pakistan, Afghanistan. I got a message last night from a guy who's still trying to get out of the country after, anyway, it's a whole other conversation. If they're holding on to hope that the church is going to save the world so that Jesus can return, that's not a very hopeful theology at all.
Dominion theology, going back to have dominion over what I've given you, which, by the way, I think is a misstep from the beginning. When he gave Adam and the woman, I don't call her Eve until after the fall, by the way, because she's not named Eve until after the fall. He named his wife Eve, the mother of life.
Not a small distinction, by the way.
Exactly. And I just lost my thread in that little sidebar there. What were we talking about?
We're talking about dominion theology.
Thank you. Yeah. To have dominion over the land. Adam was told to cultivate and keep the garden. That's not trimming the verge. That was the work of worship. It wasn't pruning hedges. It was the work God gave Adam to do, was his form of worship. That's exactly what it meant. So if that was the garden context, and now going forward in the fallen world, the corrupt world, we can't recreate Eden on our own. It's going to take someone else to get us back to Eden, which all these, literary artists want to say, back to Eden, back to Eden. There's no more Eden. Eden's gone.
Yeah.
But a new Messiah, the Messiah can return, the second Adam, can come and restore not the old Eden, but a new heaven and a new earth, which is what Revelation is about.
So is there a point, like, one of the things that I've heard in my DMs have been a little salty, I think the kids would say, the last few weeks. I actually stopped reading them. But one of the things that I keep hearing is that John Darby invented the rapture in the 1800s.
In dispensationalism, yeah.
To a larger point, dispensationalism in general.
Yeah, and that could take a little time, but I would say Darby is attributed for popularizing it. C.I. Scofield, the Scofield Study Bible. But the idea, and there's a key word in Ephesians, is what I always go to. It's the word administrations or economy. It's Ephesians 1:10, if memory serves. Don't get old, Darren. Your brain gets holes in it.
Right now, my brain is, I joke that my administrator or assistant, I can't even think of the word. I store my memory on her brain like it's a hard drive with a thumb drive.
So this is Ephesians 1, we'll start at 9. He made known to us the mystery of his will. By the way, mysterion in the Bible is not mysterious. You have to figure it out. It's something that wasn't known and is now revealed. Okay. So he made known to us the mystery of his will. So we're now, what is his will? According to the kind intention which he purposed in him, with a view to an administration, that's the word, suitable to the fullness of the times. That is the summing up of all things in Christ, things in the heavens and things on the earth. And I would argue those two verses give the best sort of landing for what dispensationalism can fairly be explained. So there were different, we aren't saved differently at different times. Salvation is still reckoned to him. He believed God. He was considered righteous. It's still by faith, through grace, not of yourselves, by faith through grace, not as a result of works that no one can boast. That hasn't changed. What has changed is, in the Old Testament, the law was a signpost of failure. The law was a signpost of perfection you're never going to reach. When Christ comes, grace is introduced. The new covenant is introduced. It's not outside you anymore. The Spirit's going to indwell you. The law is going to be written on your heart, not written on a tablet. And now the church is born in Acts 2. So the picture of those dispensations or economies of time, it's not that we're saved differently. Even the reformers talk about, they use the phrase now but not yet a lot.
Oh, a lot, yeah.
Yeah. And the idea is, there's a truth of it now but not yet. And I kind of like that sometimes, but sometimes it leads to confusion. You and I talk about layers. There's prophetic layers. what Abram heard, I don't know that he fully comprehended what that meant.
Yeah.
But over time, we see the developing of the covenant and how it works out. I mean, if you reject the God who made you a unilateral promise and you go through wars, I mean, to me, the hardest part of the Old Testament is civil war during the time of Judges. They're killing their own tribes.
Yeah. I'm literally reading through Judges right now.
It's heartbreaking to me. I mean, it's the darkest chapter of Israel's life before the exiles and it's all over.
Right.
And then we have the silent period. It's just like, I mean, we talk about the Civil War in America. How could there be a Civil War? Not the first ones, killing our own brothers and sisters. And so God's still patient with them.
Right.
Did he bring punishment? Yes. Did he discipline? Yes. The cycle of Judges shows that again and again. They cry out. He brings a deliverer. The deliverer is a whole other story. They get back in line. They have a period of peace. Wash and repeat. We do this again and again. Why does he show us that account? Nothing changes.
Right.
I remember Norm Geisler, had a brilliant professor I had. Norm, in fact, I did not know Frank Turek was discipled by Norm.
I didn't know that either.
He made a comment the other day about blew my category. So I got to call Frank and talk to him because Norm was a professor and a friend when I was at Dallas. Brilliant. John Ankerberg, the Ankerberg Show.
Yeah.
He attributes everything to Norm Geisler.
I did not know that either.
Because he was such a brilliant apologist, and he could just think in a whole new level. And he would say, if nothing else, look at these dispensations, whether it's Darby or just observations of these economies. Look at them as man's objection to God. So let's just say there was an Adamic dispensation. Don't eat the fruit. One rule. The day you eat, you will die. Mot tamut, dying you will die in Hebrew. Or they eat the fruit. And then man says, wait a minute, you didn't explain the ramifications of what's going to happen to me. You told me one thing. You need to give me more specificity. Okay, I'll give you 10 commandments. Just obey these 10. You'll be fine. Now, there's many more than the 10, but his point was man can keep those. Man says, wait a minute, you didn't give us a person to explain. Moses was out there, but he couldn't do it. You got to give us people to explain these to us. Okay, I'll give you prophets. We still want to kill the prophets. Oh, wait a minute. You didn't come down and really live here and manage it and be on site. I'll give you judges. Wait a minute. The judges were correct. And he just keeps unfolding this argument that man's having back to God. And finally he says, look, you got to give us a break. You never gave us a break. I tell you what, I've given it all along, but I'll give you a period of grace to understand, not of yourselves. What's man's final objection? You never came down here and literally ran the thing. You're up there, but you're not down here. I'll tell you what, I'll come down for 1,000 years, and I'll literally reign, and you still won't believe me.
Right.
I thought that was a wonderful, illustrative way.
Yeah.
It's not bulldogmatic, but it's a way of thinking about these economies of time, because what God gave Abram is very different than what we have in Christ Jesus.
Right. Which really, that sheds light on something that I've thought about so many times. My old pastor used to call it bookshelf theology. I'm going to put that on the shelf and come back to that one. Which is at the end of the 1,000 years, like still people are going to rebel.
Look at what's happened right now with this Charlie Kirk assassination. I mean, the polarization of people, the movement of this conservative, republic, young Christian group, which to me is so striking. They're not burning buildings. They're not breaking down glass doors. They're not stealing. Let's just say they're half crazy in the auditorium. It's very different than a group that hates and destroys and brings violence. I mean, this is just an observation. I think it's fabulous. But it also teaches me, I was telling Cindy the other day, I know we're off topic, but I said, I know Christ was persecuted, and I know he said we will always have persecution with us. But watching the vilification of this guy, Charlie Kirk, has reminded me afresh the God-man was on the planet, and they mocked him and hated him and spit at him and cussed him and tried to kill him and eventually did.
Yeah, gnashed their teeth at him,
And if nothing else, it's a sober illustration, a thimble of what it was to be Messiah. Of what he endured for those 3.5 years.
Right.
And we're still talking about Jesus.
2,000 years later. The reason I brought up the Scofield Bible, Darby, is you talk about the cultural zeitgeist right now. I don't know if it's everybody, because of these, true crime, everybody's a detective now. You mentioned Frank Turek. I mean, you saw the stories floating around that the guy behind with the white hat, he was giving a signal. Did you hear this? And, so he's clearly giving a signal. He's in on it. I'm like, that's Frank Turek. Like, literally, I swear. But what's happening in that world is everybody's a detective. If you can't believe what's true, instead of going to the Word, we're going to the internet to do research. And
those landing pages are always accurate.
But one of the things that it's the Rothschild family conspiracy, right, is that they're the ones that finance the Scofield Bible because he who controls prophecy controls the world. I don't remember the phrasing of it. And I guess one of the questions I would have for someone that's been at this a while, we're all trying to navigate this world we're in. When I want to know the truth like everybody else. I was, and you were too, by the way. We're one of the churches that opened pretty early after COVID.
Yeah, we shut for three Sundays and went back to work.
Yeah, but it was really apparently obvious to a few. If you were looking, there was what was going on. But what seems to have happened is it broke the brain of America, where everything's a conspiracy now, and fueled again by short information and bursts on phones. Yeah. So one of the things, actually, I'll tell you the thing that even triggered my heart for we needed to do a series on equipping was a friend of mine, great guy. He's sold millions and millions of records, and he sent me 2 TikTok videos saying that the word homosexuality was not in the Bible until 1946.
Yeah.
And I love the way he worded it. He said, I know what he's saying isn't accurate, but I don't feel equipped to answer
Boom.
this.
Good for him.
Right?
Yeah.
Great. And so, and it was, that's a softball, like three bullet points. He's like, oh, that makes total sense to me. But not everybody has access to, to text somebody like you or me. So we, doing the series is based on that. What has been wild is realizing that it's so needed now. The Charlie Kirk thing, the other plot twist for me was the conspiracies that are born out of, blaming Erica, that she's been paid off by Israel.
She's going to become Catholic or something.
Yeah.
It just never stops.
It went so wild, so fast. Meanwhile, God is moving in our country like I've never seen before. I mean, people giving their lives to Christ in record numbers. And
pretty exciting.
Completely missing the point, but but it's like I say, I want to know the truth. I want to know the truth behind the truth. But the answer to all of it is Jesus anyway. What if it was a conspiracy? But the answer is Jesus.
If Christ is the Word of God, and He says something, is it trustworthy? I mean, Mike Glenn has a little book about preaching to, is it postmodern culture? I forget his title.
Post-Christian world.
And I had him on the podcast a few months ago about his book, and he said, easily we get truth packets everywhere, all week long, and they come to a 30-minute sermon, and you tell them something's true. And we used to talk about the 1 hour versus the 168 hours, whatever, and that's still a problem. But when a young person has an influencer, what a word! I'm an influencer. When an influencer believes X, I now believe it. It's kind of like the theology alignment. If I'm of John MacArthur and I went to Masters, I'm going to pretty much toe the line. If I went to Dallas Seminary, I'm going to pretty much toe the line. If I go to the Moeller, I mean, so there's these alignments. We need to be kind to say Christ has not been divided. Yeah. I don't agree with all these guys on certain points, but I'm not going to throw them under the bus and vilify them. Again, Paul ends did a great job on. He uses the word stewardships of time. I like the word administrations or economies from that Ephesians 1, 9, and 10. Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Clement, Augustine, and other church fathers, they didn't say dispensationalism, but they talked about these economies and these different things. So it's not just Darby came along and invented dispensationalism. It would be like, someone today coming along and saying postmodernity. Well, it's an observation of what exists, right?
Right. Didn't create it.
We're not
It's
making
observing
it.
yeah.
And so I think it's a little disingenuous. It's so interesting. One of the early French guys, and I can't say his name, Pierre Pouy, I think is the name. He was a French mystic. He did a 6-volume systematic theology, and he had these 7 schemes: infancy, childhood, adolescence, youth, manhood, old age, renovation. And that was the way he talked about the economies, which I thought was kind of brilliant. You know,
it's good
Jonathan
language.
Edwards.
Yeah.
I mean, there's several of them that did this. Covenant theology comes along because you've got a lot more horsepower, let's say, with Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, Melanchthon, on and on with that system, which, by the way, they didn't agree on a lot. If you study the Reformers carefully, Melanchthon, Zwingli, they fought Calvin, Luther a lot. Mm-hmm. Luther was very narrow-minded and very sure of what he believed, and he would throw those guys on the communion is one example.
Yeah.
Consubstantiation, transubstantiation, memorial views. They just about disfellowshipped over their views on what was happening at the Lord's Supper. And yet we look at this sort of homogeneous Reformation. And again, that's because we're not studying what happened. We're all poor students of history.
Sure.
We really are poor students here. And I'd rather young men and women spend their time with their nose in a book trying to figure out what this means in its context and now how I understand and apply it, as opposed to reading Reformation theology. I love Reformation theology. I've read the Institutes. I read some of Gruden's book.
Yeah.
I won't read Gruden totally. I know Wayne, wonderful, brilliant man.
Yeah.
I appreciate him so much. But in your sphere of influence, you have to answer the question, is this true? Did God speak? Can I trust him at his word? Now, when it's complicated and hard, there are ways to answer that question, and that's what Bible study methods is all about. You look in the context. If Paul uses a word, did he use it other places? What did it mean there? How is it used in the New Testament? And now I'm starting to understand a term like justification or sanctification. I don't just look at one verse to figure that out. And Bible study methodology, that's the hermeneutic for me, is how do you begin reading this book and understanding this book, and that solves a lot of these problems. Does it answer them? All of them? No. You'll always have more questions than answers.
But it gives an amazing foundation that we can interpret the world with instead of letting the world interpret
100%.
the word. And what's been so on my heart is because I feel like I've had a front row seat to it is obviously anti-Semitism is as old as the Jewish people. Never has there been a more persecuted people ever. But how quickly questioning Benjamin Netanyahu turns into the Jews controlling the world. Again, in the conspiracy world, it becomes not, hey, there was a Jewish guy that did this. It's the Jews doing this. In the 90s, I worked at a talent agency called William Morris Agency, and it was literally the first talent agent ever. And I cannot remember his last name, but it was not Morris. He changed it because it was a Jewish name. And so here I am, 1990s, 24 years old, at a Jewish company that we couldn't order pork products.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, as secular as it can get. I mean, any other commandments, they were free to break, apparently, but we couldn't do no bacon.
No bacon.
Yeah, it broke my heart. But it was kind of the first time I ran up against even just the Paul's statement about the Jews are an enemy on account of the gospel. Like they're hardened, their hearts are hardened. Because I was kind of in the Christian country world, mostly Christian, and there were LA agents that I would send records to for movie placements, and this guy, I won't say his name. He called me once. He's like, Darren, you're a nice kid. I'm going to be really honest with you. Nobody gives a bleep about Christian music out here. And what I didn't know behind the scenes was, there's a resistance and distrust and hatred of Christians from a lot of Jewish people. Not the Jews, but there are some Jewish people that would hold that. The rest of that story is about a year later. He calls and he's from his car phone. He's clearly in a convertible. He used the F word like as a verb, a noun, an adjective, like all in the same sentence, about this record that he had forgotten that I'd sent his way. And he ended up putting it like we actually printed a little cache on that. He put it on a lot of these movies, but he had come at it from an approach of his history with Christianity, what he had been taught in Christianity, and but I say that also. Then there's the hardening of the hearts of it, and what feels like if we go to the Word first and say, hey, you and I both had encounters inside of Israel where Jewish people are very resistant to us.
Suspicious, and rightly so.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have a good track record as far as Christianity goes there.
And think of during World War II and the pogroms. I mean, we talked about earlier. We talked about the Holocaust Museum in Yad Vashem, a name and a place in Israel. It's the most sobering place you'll ever go to. I mean, the one in D.C. is phenomenal as well. Phenomenal is the wrong word, but it's overwhelming. But to spend some time in D.C. or in Israel at Yad Vashem and not understand the persecution of the Jews.
Yeah.
And you and I both know not all those people that were murdered were Orthodox,
right,
follow the rule Jews. They were Jews nationally. And yet the final solution was to eradicate God's people. Had you and I lived in the 40s, I'm pretty sure we'd have been preaching sermons about Armageddon about the Antichrist and end times.
Right.
And today we're seeing a vilification of the Jew all over again, but we're also seeing the gospel watered and standing up in a way that I wouldn't have believed if you'd have told me 5 years ago, Darren.
I wouldn't. I didn't. Spending time in the Gaza envelope right now, most of the people there are secular Jews.
Yeah, nominal.
Which is why they moved there. They were under the impression if we're very nice to the Gazans that are there, they'll see that
relationship with neighbors. Yeah,
they'll see that we're part of them. It's like Obama sending pallets of cash, like Walter White, to Iran, and it's definitely shattered a worldview for them that they've ironically kept us at bay because of our history, suspicious of Christians.
Rightly so.
And now they're suddenly seeing that they're, yesterday I had lunch with a couple of friends who live in the Gaza envelope. They're in the U.S. for October 7th. And he was telling me how lonely it feels right now to be a Jew in the world. Again, he's a secular guy. He's a professor at the University of Tel Aviv, a health science guy. He's the one that said this feels a lot like the 1930s would have felt. But he kept going how lonely it is. But he said the thing that's giving us hope is that there's this group of evangelical Christians that I didn't know loved us, and I still don't know why you love us, but you do, and it makes us a little less lonely. And what people have on Sunday, one of the things that I was trying to do was not just be a jerk, because it makes me angry when anybody's being bullied or persecuted, marginalized, and for people to not see that, Shannon was like, you come off as being real defensive, and I'm like, well, I kind of am being defensive. Like there's a group of people that were assaulted and raped and tortured and murdered. It was just
children put in ovens.
So, but I took her. Hopefully, I took her advice. I took a step back from it. But the thing that I really want to caution anybody is to say that any group of people, like we've as conservatives reject identity politics in any other situation, we got to reject it with the Jewish people as well. Like just because they're a Jew doesn't mean they're evil, and we've had people leave the church, start podcasts, because the whole synagogue of Satan thing, and I pray for them, I hope the best, but it's like even just following their social media right now or their YouTube channels, it's like, wow, it almost feels demonic. What is demonic? Hating any group of people is demonic. Again, you go back to the Word of God, they're enemies on your account, but God still has a plan. I would be accursed if my Jewish brothers would.
What should we say then? Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness attained righteousness, even the righteousness which is by faith, but Israel, pursuing a law of righteousness, did not arrive at that law. Why? Because they did not pursue it by faith, but as though it were by works. They stumbled over the stumbling stone, as it is written, behold, I will lay in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and he who believes in him will not be disappointed. And he continues, brethren, my heart's desire, prayer to God, is for their salvation. I testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. I love that.
Yeah.
And we see a lot of Christians that way. They have a zeal for God, but they don't really know what that means. Not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. For Christ is the end of the law, for righteousness to everyone who believes. And then he talks about how Moses was aligned with this. But again, has God rejected his people? No.
Yeah.
No. And, the blood curse obviously was a maddening crowd. Crowd psychology is a fabulous area to study.
Yes.
And they said horrible things, but that's not an unpardonable sin.
Right.
That's not a curse that God is going to hold to them because they said, let the curse be on us if we kill.
Right.
Curses on all of us. Oh, no. Christ became the curse.
Right. And it feels even silly to have to say it, but if God hasn't rejected the Jews, then neither should we. It feels really simple.
Or anyone, for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. The whole across the board. He's not rejected Arabs, Egyptians.
Back to Charlie Kirk for just a minute. All of us who are over 30 are learning more and more about Charlie Kirk, right? And you watch some of those little snippets where he's taking on a very angry person, or he doesn't get mad. I mean, sometimes he's got a pretty good jab of humor, and sometimes if the person's unhinged, he might shut it down. But you don't see a disrespect. You see a guy really cared.
Yeah, he would ask them a question about their position, make sure I understand your position. Yeah. Like, it was really, I felt like I learned a lot going back and watching some of the videos.
He studied debate.
Yeah, he must
studied it.
Well, he was crushing it. I have this tendency to get a little angry and aggressive in a debate. And,
not you.
The hillbilly comes out in me.
I wouldn't know.
But that's something I'm taking from that. And even in this current season where we're in, specifically as it relates to Israel, where I didn't plan, honestly, when we were talking about starting a series on equipping people, I didn't plan on starting with Israel, but the internet was just exploding. Small groups are having debates now, and it's like we got to at least teach something so they have a foundation to stand on.
In a similar way, when 9/11 occurred, I was in a church in the Northern Virginia, D.C. area, and we had a lot of military in our church, a lot of administrative, a lot of elected officials, and families involved in all that. And when 9/11 happened, I forgot what series I was in, and I went to teach the book of Judges. And it was kind of what you're doing. It was just, and the thing I camped on was there was a time in Israel's history when what they had to go through was that their children might learn war.
That's right.
Talk about sobriety. And the reason I felt it was such an important digression to say, wait a minute, I made the comment, I've had people remind me of this, it was dumb luck or God's kindness. I said, the world will never be the same. There was no TSA. There was nothing. There was Homeland Defense.
Yeah.
I mean, there was nothing. And all that begins after 9/11. And the seminal role that church and those people played, we had some that died in the Pentagon, some that were severely injured. And it was such a surreal experience to look back on. I think this is your 9/11. This is the time when God's allowed this to happen under his purview. We're broken people in a broken context, and sin has effects. And he's allowed that to happen. And in his providence, though, we're watching him work, and you're an agent of faithfulness saying, wait a minute, this is a good time to equip our folks.
Right.
This is a good time to step back. And for whatever reason, you said, hey, Israel, we need to talk about who Israel is.
Yeah.
These are God's chosen people, friends. You can't just, destroy them and call them genocide when they've been the subject of genocide for how many thousands of years.
Yeah, and that reason is quite simply the world is teaching people theology again, and it comes in the shape of podcasts or media folks or a couple of useful idiots out there being funded by Qatar. But coming back to God's word has to be our foundation because it's the only foundation, and there's going to be lots of other topics, and we're going to cover everything from sexuality to transgenderism, but starting with Israel, and as even as this week has unfolded, realizing God started with Israel, so it's probably a good place for us to start.
That'll preach.
As
Stan Toussaint was it, that'll preach.
That'll preach. But yeah, I mean, literally, I shared on Sunday, and we'll wrap up. But you can even feel it in Paul's language, almost saying to the people he's writing to that, what about the Jews then? If God's going to keep his promise to us, how do you explain him breaking his promise to the Jewish people? And him coming through just saying he didn't. That promise stands.
And us Gentiles, we're hinged on that promise. We were grafted in, Paul says very clearly. We have no right whatsoever. You respect this process.
Yes.
You were grafted in. You deserved hell.
I'm just lucky to be invited to the party, man. Like my Gentile self. I'm glad there was an and then the Gentiles piece of that for us. So, Doc, thanks for being here, man.
Hey, I commend you for what you're doing, buddy. God's using you. It's fun to watch from the cheap seats, and I'm so thrilled with Conduit and how you're being faithful and leading your folks through it. And stay straight, stay sober, and God will continue to use you, brother. It's exciting to watch. Appreciate
you saying that. You've been a huge influence on that for me. You are my theological phone a friend.
That's kind of scary.
I pinch myself. I'm like, I don't chat GPT it. I easily PT it. Yeah, ease PT it. But hey, thanks for joining us today. Pray for Mo that he gets out of Wyoming back here alive. Remember, subscribe. Is that what I'm supposed to say, Caleb? Subscribe and all that stuff. Subscribe, do that stuff. Whatever you're supposed to do, Mo knows. But thanks. We'll I'm
click that thumb up, right? And then click that thumb up thing. Yeah,
a couple of old guys here. I don't know. And if you're in town, I'm supposed to say this too. We meet every Sunday. Obviously, we're online, and if you can avoid that 9:45 service, you'll thank yourself and me later for that. But hopefully, we'll see you this weekend. Have a great week.